Okay, I am here today with a good friend of mine, Andrew Thompson. Andrew, thanks for joining me today. Andrew, will you please give a brief introduction of yourself to anybody who might watch this video?
Yeah, of course. Kate, it's good to be here. I appreciate you reaching out and asking to do this. I'm excited. I think this is gonna be fun. It could be a good discussion. Yeah, like you said, my name is Andrew Thompson. I work for BOK Financial. I've been with BOK Financial now for almost 9 years. It's crazy to think about that. I work, my title now is the manager of client experience measurement and insight for wealth management. So my job is to ensure that we have the correct strategies and tactics in place from a client insight and client data perspective for our wealth management division here at BOK Financial. So kind of just a little more details. Essentially, I act as an internal consultant on the voice of the client for our wealth management line of business leaders, from private banking to our retail advisors to our institutional wealth groups and our insurance groups. And then there are a few more, but that's kind of the gist.
No, that's great. Thanks for sharing. So I have to say, like, before we really jump into it, I have a brief surprise for you.
Okay.
That isn't that pleasant for me, but for anybody watching this video, you might notice the OU basketball behind Andrew. So OU is where Andrew went to school, the University of Oklahoma. I went to Oklahoma State. So we have become good friends because I choose not to hold his character flaws against him. But I have an employee, Tim, who is actually a big University of Texas guy. And yeah, that's the face. And I had the misfortune of my OSU Cowboys playing Texas in the Big 12 tournament a couple of weeks ago for men's basketball. And we had a friendly wager that I lost because Texas beat my Cowboys in that game. And so I have to pay that wager off by wearing this hat during this entire YouTube video, which
Oh my
Andrew, I wanted
goodness.
to see when faced with your two biggest rivals on the screen, like both OSU and Texas, if I could fluster you a little bit as we get into some of your answers today.
No way, man. Little brother doesn't fluster big brother.
I
So
tried to figure out if there was a way that I could flip this upside down,
yeah,
but I
that'd be
don't know how
good.
to do it. Yeah.
That'd be good. Yeah, I'd have to call, if you did that though, I'd have to call a 15-yard penalty on you because the NCAA is
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, you can't
swamped.
do horns down anymore. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's against the
yeah.
rules. I don't
I
know.
don't
They
see.
might have relaxed that since y'all are going to the SEC, right? Like it might be approved again since you guys are bailing because it was from the Big
Well,
12 office.
no one's gonna get mad at Alabama. But
Yeah,
if you noticed in the NCAA tournament, Miami was doing the horns down the whole time as they were
yeah,
playing. And
yeah,
I mean, it just says basketball isn't as soft
yeah,
as football's gotten, you
yeah. I
know?
guess. I guess
Yeah,
that's how it is now.
yeah.
Um,
But no, I love it. I love it.
all right. No,
Mm.
I unfortunately lost that bet to Tim. I also love Tim despite his character flaws. So maybe one day we'll bring you guys to the light side. But
Heck yeah.
appreciate the background. Appreciate
Hmm.
you joining. I think the reason why I wanted to have this conversation is because here at Brewster Consulting Group, obviously we're a data first company, but one of the things that we focus on and one of the places where you can really drive value with data is by understanding your client experience. And I think especially in light of recent environment and events in financial services, everybody knows about Silicon Valley Bank and all the things. It's been kind of a never-ending saga over the last couple of weeks since that first started. Um, there's a lot to be gleaned from understanding how your customers are feeling, from really measuring your client experience, from being able to understand your customer journey and how you deliver that. And
Yep.
you have kind of built a career in being an expert on that space. And I really like that the role that you're in now really takes it from kind of an analytical and measurement perspective, which is really kind of in the ballpark of what we do. So I really just wanted to have a conversation and pick your brain around what that looks like and what it looks like for you guys, what some best practices are, some things about if there's anybody out there watching who, across many industries, but especially financial services, if they're trying to figure out how they can effectively start to measure and engage with their clients and really understand what their client experiences are. That's kind of the area that I would like to start with. So I
Yeah,
want to
of
start
course.
like a briefly a high level. You already introduced your background, but from an importance perspective, in your own words, can you just help me understand why you believe that um, client experience is so important for organizations, and what
Yeah.
type of role does it play in the overall success of a business as far as effectively managing what their client experience is?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a good question. It's a loaded question for sure. You can go a lot of different ways, but I think if you think about how all industries and not just financial services that, I work in, but all industries are going from a kind of more of a digital path forward, right? And the client having a better understanding that if I call in or if I'm doing any kind of work, whether I have a login, whether I've used you before, you need to understand what I've done, what I want to do, what my thoughts and feelings are. And I think that's just going to get more and more prevalent, that idea of personalization. And so when you talk about client experience, and I think why it's so important is because that's just the expectation. You have firms like Amazon, you have firms like Starbucks that whether you go into a Starbucks that you use frequently and they know you, they know your order. You go into Amazon, you can see your entire history. If you're chatting with Amazon, they know, hey, are you talking about order XYZ? And that's this whole idea of kind of personalization is becoming more and more prevalent in the marketplace. We have to be able to understand what our clients think about certain products and services, where they are in their journey, and then how we can be predictive rather than reactive in trying to understand what their next step is, what's the emotional component of certain pieces. Like, think of, for example, buying a house, right? Especially over the last, 3 years. Think of one of the major demographics who is buying a house for the first time. It's folks who grew up during 2008. So that's already a really stressful event because they saw what happened in 2008, kind of in their formative years, and so they have that perception going in. Same thing. Then you see though, as the rates start going up and down, it's already the stress. And so for as a firm to understand that that's a part of that segment and that persona and how we react accordingly or how we act accordingly is going to be based on that whole idea of whether it's an engagement framework you have in place or an understanding of, for Andrew, I know that based on conversation, based on his activity, based on what articles he's reading, understanding that what he's doing within our organization, I know that this is a major stressor point for him. So I'm going to be a little bit more hands-on. And I think that's what understanding client perception and what really client experience can do is gives, whether it's advisors, whether it's any type of support staff, a better understanding of what that customer feels, and then from a strategy perspective, what that segment looks like, right? And that's just going to be more and more important, and especially too as you think about the amount of data available. I mean, think about contact centers. How many of them actually have a real transcription process where they're going through all 50,000 calls that they might get? Very few. What they're doing is they're QAing 5 calls a month for each agent. So what, a total of maybe 50 to 100 calls? And you're going to say that then you have an understanding of what your clients think and feel? No, you're not.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's so much data available and there's so much information available for you to be more equipped to have that knowledge. I kind of took that a little bit of a roundabout way, but I just, having that pulse is going to really allow you to be able to, whether it's put that in the middle of your design thinking or as think about strategies, be a little bit more human centered.
I'm taking notes because you're saying things that are triggering more questions that I have for you as we go through this. But like, so there were 3 points that you hit on in that I want to revisit. The first one is predictive instead of reactive. So
Yep.
one of the things, I did a video with some chief risk officers about the SVP collapse, SVB. Sorry, I feel like I've said SVP several times when talking about it, and I'm sorry, Scott Van Pelt, if you ever see this, because it's not you, Silicon Valley Bank. But I think the thing there is what is interesting to me, and what the chief risk officers talked a lot about when we did that video was, you said being predictive instead of reactive to stuff. And I think that's so important, especially now, right? Because I'm thinking
Yeah.
about when we were growing up, we're the same age. When we were growing up, if you wanted to cancel, right? I remember we had DirecTV on my college duplex that we lived in when we were in college. And when we wanted to cancel because we were moving out at the end of the semester, I had to call, be on hold for like an hour. Like
Yeah,
there were these enormous barriers to cancel your
yeah,
services, right? To the point where unless you really wanted to cancel, like you kind of were like, forget it. Like I'm fine with
mhm,
whatever. And now, whether it's being able to almost instantaneously transfer all of your funds to another financial institution, whether it's
yeah,
being able to like almost instantaneously go into your online account if you're getting like a subscription service like a Netflix or something like that and cancel. Like you're only like 30 seconds away from losing a
yeah,
customer at any given time, which is
yeah,
very different from past environments where there were much larger barriers for people being able to like cancel or get out of a contract. How does that even more so like enhance the need to be predictive on what your clients are going to do because you don't get as many you don't get them calling in and then you get to pitch them five different retention offers when they're trying to
right,
cancel, right?
right.
Instead, it's snap, you're done, and now you lost a client.
Yeah. Well, I think if you think about it, back to those days, they did that on purpose,
Yeah.
because there wasn't this ability to listen in from when I say listen in, I mean like a tag, like a Google tag,
Yeah.
listen in to see what activity is happening online, right? And
Yeah.
so it was a way for them to say, okay, at least I can get out in front of a client and get them to leave because most times what they're going to offer you another 6 months for $5 and you're going to say
Yeah.
yes. Especially when it's a Friday afternoon after a
Yeah.
long week, you're
Yeah.
way more likely to say yes. But to your point, it, that it's this whole idea of being able to look at and understand that customer journey that you mentioned earlier. So it just highlights the importance of having the ability to understand how people are utilizing or how clients are utilizing your digital space because you start to see whether it's similar activities to a customer who's churned
Yeah.
or similar activities to a customer who's exhibited dissatisfaction. What it gives you is the ability to jump back in. Now, I've always been a fan of, I don't know if you're familiar with Matt Dixon, but he's an author who wrote The Effortless Experience. And so the idea is that as long as you maintain an effortless experience throughout and you reduce friction, your customers, whether it's their revenue, whether it's their experience, is going to slowly go up and up and up. And so it's essentially the set point continues to rise. Now, when you talk about moments of truth, right? So moment of truth would be I'm really having a bad day. They see it, they can jump in. It's this whole idea of an ebb and flow and saying that moments of truth can
Yeah.
increase satisfaction, but just with those highs, you have those lows. So I think what it highlights is in the example is Ritz Carlton going through this with his kid and doing all these different crazy things for the highs and lows. And what it shows you is the revenue it costs to do that
Yeah.
is outweighed by just having a consistent frictionless experience. And so that's what you're able to do when you can really key in on activities is you can eliminate friction at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's so important to be able to predict what people are doing because you can predict when they're going to hit those friction points and then you can figure out okay, how am I going to eliminate that in the first place so there's no dip. It's just a
Yeah.
continual and gradual rise.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So just to make sure that I understand what you're saying, like if I'm saying like if I have customer journey maps that chart out like let's say I have three products and I know like okay, the first year as a customer in product A, B, or C, this is essentially what their journey is.
Yeah.
And at if in product A at month three, they generally hit this friction point. And because
Yep.
of these factors in month three, they start to question like, is this worth what I'm paying for this service or not? If you
Yeah.
know that and can cut it off beforehand and then hit everyone as they're approaching that friction point and help them more smoothly navigate those
Yeah.
frictional waters, then you're going to at a much higher rate have long-term retention on those clients.
Yeah, and they're going to be probably more valuable because if you think
Yeah.
about it, right, whether it's a personal touch, whether it's a system improvement, right? If it's a system inefficiency that you fix, I mean, now that's an inefficiency that's gone. And
Yeah.
if it's a personal touch, you think about that as, oh, I've created more loyalty with this client
Yeah.
because I jumped in at a certain point when
Yeah.
I was starting to feel a certain way and they
Yeah.
saw that.
Yeah.
So yeah, 100%.
So I that kind of bridges into like another question that came up when you were talking earlier is talked about like being predictive instead of reactive. But one thing that I think has become almost like a minimum expectation, and you said this is personalization, right?
Yeah.
Like you get personalized recommendations for everything. How hard is that, right? our famous examples are like Netflix, Q's, and Amazon, right? But like those
Yeah.
are
Spotify.
yeah, like but those are enormous technology companies in Silicon Valley, right? Your
Yeah.
average bank, healthcare system, manufacturer, like are not Spotify and Netflix
No.
and Amazon. So, how hard is the personalization piece to accomplish at scale for these companies that don't have maybe the same technology levers to pull that companies like an Amazon and a Netflix have?
It's almost impossible. I mean, at the end of the day, it really is almost impossible unless you're willing to adopt, like a fin. And there's really two ways: tear it down and restart. Right? Tear it down and restart your infrastructure from a data perspective, from a cloud. When you think about like legacy, I'm just going to use legacy banks as an example.
Yeah.
Right? Banks that have been around a long time and have been doing well for a long time. Most of the times with their systems, what they're doing is they're just building on top of it. They're putting band-aids they're putting band-aids on systems to continue to run because it's just the next fix, right? And I'm going to focus my money elsewhere, especially as customer perception is changing. So,
And
and
they're all
personally,
siloed.
yeah,
Like that's
exactly.
yeah.
That's the worst part. And, and personalization is not, hey, Kade, email,
Yeah.
right? Or it's I put your name on a happy birthday email because I have a piece of data that says I know when your birthday is.
Yeah.
Personalization is, exactly what Spotify does, putting together a new list of new music based on your listening recommendations. Now, to your point, their data source is probably singular, and their algorithms, can compute that. From a, when you and call centers are a prime example. So if I am a client, let's say I'm a wealth client, in a perfect world where I have perfect personalization, my wealth advisor would know when I call into our contact center,
Mhm.
how I'm using our digital banking, when I've rage clicked on a mortgage application that's not working, and my kids, age and what they're doing, right? So like with how I would think that companies like us who do have data silos can beat that is investments in a centralized repository or
Yeah.
investments in a firm, like an experienced management firm like a Qualtrics,
Yeah.
where all that data funnels into one place and they aggregate it and then they run their AI. If we have any type of identifier across clients to connect them, to
Yeah.
be able to say, okay, here's what Andrew Thompson did on March 29th when he was on his digital banking. He
Yeah.
went in and he looked at transfers from this account. Or, he went on to his 401k and was looking at his contribution rate, changed it to 15%, but put it back down to 12. Maybe my financial planner can have a conversation with that client to say, hey, you're thinking about increasing your retirement. Are you having a new goal? What's going on? Let's
Yeah.
have that conversation,
Yeah.
right? But that data has to feed into a centralized place for it to see that, and that's just you don't see that yet. You don't
Yeah.
see that yet. I think the
Yeah.
firms who are doing a good job are really starting to buy into this piece, but
Yeah.
it's expensive. It's
Yeah. It is.
expensive to do that.
It's expensive
So
and it's hard because like
yeah,
I think banking is a great example and contact centers in financial services is a great example, although contact centers across industries share this. But like one of the things about banking that can be complicated, I'm gonna use like you and McKinsey as an example, right? Like you guys could be on the same checking account
right.
and that's in the core banking system. And then you guys could each have your own savings account and
Hmm.
you're not on each other's savings account. And then
Hmm.
you could have a mortgage together, or maybe just one of you's on the mortgage, but then maybe Mackenzie's car is only there, but the
Right.
mortgage is in the servicing system. The other details are in the core banking system. Maybe you have a 401k that's managed by like a 401k provider there. And then maybe Mackenzie is the CEO of a commercial client in your
Right.
commercial banking space, right? So
Exactly.
you have that business touch point too, but
Hmm.
all of those are siloed systems and you have like
Hmm.
this very complex relationship because you have a lot of wallet share with this client, but you
Hmm.
don't understand it at all because they can walk into a branch and ask about something personal or ask about their business account and then nobody really knows that that happened outside of that branch and those things don't talk to each other. And so if you don't
Yeah.
build like a data infrastructure to
Yep.
truly understand how your customers are interacting with you really
Yep.
don't know what's happening.
No, you don't. And that's the key to personalization is
Yeah.
knowing your customer, right? And so, and I'll even kind of take it a step further. if an employee knows all that, if they're not inputting information into our CRM to notate that, no one's gonna know. And then, same thing. So say that I have money elsewhere in another organization. If I'm not asking questions, or if we don't have any type of financial aggregator, then how do we know?
Yeah. No,
So
100%. You don't know
yeah.
what the
Mhm.
opportunity for potentially increasing wallet share with
Right.
that customer is, because you don't
Right.
know what else they have, right? And that's like where I think I see that a lot, right? And financial services is like the most apparent one, but healthcare is another big one, right? I know you don't
Yes.
work in healthcare, but like if you think about all the
McKinsey does.
data that
Yeah.
exists out there, right? Like you
Mhm.
have wearable devices now where you're collecting, heartbeat data, steps, a lot of things that are inputs. You have all of the different touch points, because you probably have a primary care physician and then all of these other places where you're going for different types of care. And there's just
Yeah.
no really effective way to tie
Mhm.
all of that together without investing money in actually being able to build it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think back, like, so you obviously know I blew my knee out 2 summers ago,
Yeah.
but like every time I go see my primary care physician, or anytime I go see anyone in the same system, in the
Yeah.
same health system that I got my surgery in, I always have to say, they always ask, when was your last surgery? You
Yeah.
know that.
And it's like, you did
You
it. What do you
you did
mean?
it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
paid you. I paid
Yeah.
you to do it. Yeah. And so, and it's like, that's
Yeah.
frustrating. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
No,
So
100. It feels like that's ridiculous. I remember, like, when I started in financial services, we both
mhm.
started in the branch network, right? And I remember being out in the branch network, and
Yeah.
I would be there, and there'd be like somebody who just called like the contact center trying to get, like,
Yep.
say, an overdraft fee refunded. And they were really frustrated because they didn't get it refunded. And then they would come in already upset to the
Yep.
bank, and I would
Yep.
talk to them. And I'd be like, "Oh, how you doing today? What brings you in?" And then they're already mad, and I have no idea like what's going on, even though they just talked to the bank. Like that's
Absolutely.
not a good experience either. And
It's
then
not.
you're also, as an employee, blindsided because you don't have this bare level of knowledge that
Yeah.
they expect you to have.
Yep. Well, and then you're frustrated too with the organization, because then you're like, why wouldn't anyone reach out to me? Why wouldn't anyone tell me that this is my client? Well, in the contact center, do they even know that it was your client?
So,
So yeah, no, and then I mean, and even layering on, that's a culture thing, right? So, you'd have good agents who would put notes in, or you'd have good agents who would reach out. That's a dime a dozen. Same
so,
thing with advisors. And I think there's a sense of competition in financial services where it's like, well, this is my client. I need to know the most about them in case I leave, because then I'm going to take them with me,
yeah.
versus let the organization know, so that way we in customer insights can give you more tools to serve them better.
No, no,
Yep.
100%. And I think that's where it comes from. So I want to get back to um the final point I had on you just had all kinds of gold nuggets in your kind of opening monologue there, but contact centers, you've called that out
Yeah.
like a couple times, right? Like
Yeah.
we work a lot with contact centers. One thing, do you have like specific solutions or ways to approach that you've seen that are pretty effective in being able to measure the variety of experiences that are
Yeah.
happening in a contact center? Like I've seen a tool, Observe AI. I don't know if you've ever seen it them, but it's kind of like an AI powered engine for doing the QA process in mass. I'm curious, like, as an expert in that space, like what you've seen that you really like as far as how organizations can approach solving that particular issue.
Yeah. So, contact center is your gold mine. It's your Pandora's box. So be careful. But it is your 100% your gold mine, and it's your Bible. It should be, especially for retail organizations. So we utilize Qualtrics. So Qualtrics is a experience management company, and just experience management has kind of been how my perception of client experience has evolved, and
Yeah.
and we can go into more of that later. But they have their tool is called Discover XM, so Discover Experience Management. So it's a speech analytics process that what it does is you plug in the transcription, you plug in the audio files from the calls. So we'll just use an example of 50,000 calls. So you plug in the audio file of 50,000 calls through their Discover XM platform. It transcribes all those audio files. And then what it does is it assigns emotion, it assigns sentiment, and it pulls out kind of a topical analysis for each call. Now, built on the metadata that you might have, whether it's agent, client, and then all their operational information, region, location, whatever. What it'll do is, using their AI platform, it'll put together a dashboard for any different kind of user. So let's talk about the customer service, the customer service team lead, right? Puts together them a dashboard for their agents. And so it talks about, Andrew is really great in this aspect, but a lot of his clients have been exhibiting this type of emotion. They've been exhibiting frustrated emotion. Well, it turns out 85% of his calls are because of an online password reset. If a firm is fully integrated, now you're able to look at those clients who called in, and you can tag in and see what they've done in their digital journey, right? And you can see, okay, well, it's actually because our link, or we have a something isn't working. So now that AI coming up with that prediction is going to send that to the channel manager, whether it's the contact center channel manager or the digital banking channel manager. So it's all of it's layered on and linked together. And so then, but what it's going to go back to that team lead is, it will say, okay, Andrew did a good job at handling the frustration. However, there's probably some places in his comments where he could have been a little more knowledgeable on certain processes, because our knowledge base is also linked into Qualtrics, where they can see that the answer was here. Where the coaching suggestion then comes to the team lead is they need to be more knowledgeable on process and procedures. So it's given you a layup in terms of, what do I need to look at for my agents, what do I need to coach, and then again back to the contact center, whether the director, the technology owner, it's showing you, here are the hot spots and the areas of opportunity. Here are where your calls are coming in from. Here's the emotional sentiment around each topic. Then you can disseminate that out based on different workflows that you automatically build into the system, or based on manual processes, depending on how much money you want to spend or how deep you want to go. And that's, there are a million companies that do that. Verint does it, Qualtrics does it, Medallia does it, Quantum Metric does all this information. But the idea is, when you think about QA, again, for a human, there's bias. For a machine, you can write in an algorithm, and then if you have any type of natural language processing or machine learning, it gets more and more efficient. And so when you're talking about, then, if I have 50,000 calls, well, think about that, right? That's 50,000 interactions. How that will give you a better idea of any friction point than any survey, any manual QA process, than anything will. And I think, that's the way of the future, and that's how we embrace AI. I mean, it's the same thing with like ChatGPT, right? You throw in a transcription and you say, pull me on insights, it's going to do it. Now, there's still bias in that, but like at the same time, you're talking about, bias across, or not bias across, but you're talking about 50,000 opportunities to look at what's going on. That's going to paint you way clearer of a picture in way less time than any type of manual process can do that.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. And, as like my background is Lean Six Sigma, and like one of the big tools in Lean Six Sigma is voice of the customer, right? Like it's about like, how do we actually like listen to the customer, understand their concerns, their frustrations, how they're feeling, and then build measurable outcomes around like what they're saying, right? And so if you have, generally in a traditional Lean Six Sigma project, the way that plays out is you go physically sit with people and you have to spend time like asking them. But in this new environment, we've got 50,000 interactions in your example, that if you can leverage technology and advanced analytics, machine learning, AI, things like that, these tool sets that are available, you can do your voice of the customer in an effective way that's scalable. So that makes you a lot more efficient for large organizations, because you can now grow exponentially with the technology. You don't have to hire more people to listen to more interactions, right? If you're sampling, 5 calls out of every 100 or whatever it is, you have to build a team in direct correlation with the number of calls that you take. So as your business grows, you're adding cost from a payroll perspective every time you go up. But if you can use and leverage technology to scale your business, but not have to increase the personnel cost to do that work, then it becomes much more efficient. So let me ask, go ahead.
I'll say one thing about this too, and this is as someone who has come from that QA world, who has done those QAs. That job is terrible. It's it's time consuming, it's repetitive. Now, and think about this too from an employee experience perspective. So if I'm able to layer on any type of analytics around employee experience to those calls, and I see that agent A or agent B got 100 calls in the last 2 weeks that was just frustrated and demeaning. Now, as a manager, I also know that, okay, that could potentially impact their employee experience. How am I going to be able to address that? Because employee experience is the biggest indicator of client experience, right? So it gives you that all that sense also to say, okay, I need to make sure I can step in and make sure that they're feeling okay. And as you're measuring those two things in tandem, you can see how they correlate and see how one improves the other.
So that makes a ton of sense, and I like that. I want to go directly back to what you just said there. Employee experience is the number one indicator of client experience. So that kind of makes sense if you think about it from like a logical, common sense perspective. I guess my question in a broader fashion is like, what does that matrix actually look like in most environments? Because I feel like if you went back 20 years, it was probably like a super, super direct correlation, right? Because so many of the interactions people would have with your customer would be person to person, right? They'd be calling and you'd be having that conversation. But now we live in an environment where, going back to the contact center example, you have chatbots, right? There's a lot more focus on self-service transactions. If you're in a retail branch bank, there's a lot of focus on pushing people to the ATMs for like deposit and very transactional level interactions, right? And those are all good things, but you've added the employee engagement, but now you've added this technological component of how people interact with you digitally, and now you balance that. So what does that equation look like in modern times, and how much has that changed over the past 5 years from what we were seeing when we were kind of growing up in the financial services space?
Well, I think the biggest change is now that digital is no longer its own entity. I mean, when you think about what we consider frontline and brick and mortar, right? That was the branches. That was us when we were in there talking to clients. Your digital space is now your frontline. And that's going to become more and more, that's just going to become more and more prevalent as you start to see more, digital natives in kind of entering the workforce, enter into wealth, enter into whether it's have life crises. That's going to be, more and more the norm. But I think, and I'm going to go back to this topic, I call it experience management. And I think that's where we're headed. That's where we are, and that's where we're going. This idea that client experience, employee experience, user experience, product experience, and to a degree, brand experience funnels into this overall like thought process and overall thing of experience management, because all those things together is how you can quantify and personalization, right? How you can build out and have the greatest idea of what customers think, what they feel, and if their behaviors are, whether they supplement that, and if they, what they're saying they're going to do, what they do is actually the same thing. And then two, how you can be predictive to say, okay, if I know you're doing this, then you're probably going to do this. Or if, I know how hands-on you want us to be, we can do that. And so that's where I think the future is. Whereas I think, 5 years ago, I think you started seeing the shift 5 years ago because, that's really when Amazon started taking off. It's what I think happened is I think COVID really just fast forwarded that process.
So everything became digital. People got pushed to those channels.
Yeah. Well, and I'll talk about too, like one of the things that I heard, on a podcast that I was listening to during COVID was that you had businesses that, that went under, right? You had a lot of businesses that went under, but you also had a lot of businesses that were able to capitalize, and that's whether good or bad, that's capitalism. And that's how our economy runs. But, and I think of and I'm going to use Qualtrics again as an example. So if you look at 5 years ago, this whole idea of customer experience, there are 100 different firms entering the market, from Qualtrics to Medallia, Momentum, InMoment, Merit CX. I could go on and on, right? There's a really good firm called Clarabridge. Clarabridge was an innovator in this whole idea of speech analytics. Their contact center technology and the way that they could put emotion on text and really be able to explain that and explain how that provides value was the first. They're the first to do it. So during COVID, what happened? Qualtrics bought them, acquired their technology, and now you're starting to see firms like that acquire these other smaller firms that might have gone down a little bit because of COVID, but it's increasing their ability to be this kind of end all be all thing, right?
Yeah.
Like one of the things that they're aiming to do, and I thought this was cool because when you think about it, like Microsoft is a suite of products depending on your need.
Yeah.
Word, PowerPoint, Excel. Qualtrics wants to be similar. So
Yeah.
it's their design XM, or their design XM is how you design feedback methods, how you design market research. Their
Yeah.
Discover is how you pull out insights. They have so many a suite of products to be able to get different insights and to plug different things in. They have a digital banking or a digital listener, and I think that's the difference between 5 years ago and now, is that you have these firms who are starting to get more mature in what they do. Now, for those like us, I think the difference between 5 years ago and now is we're just maybe like 2% less siloed than we were then, but we still have a long way to go.
That's funny. No, I think that makes sense, and I think it's interesting. It's an interesting transition. So I want to ask you a question, same question in two parts.
Okay.
Question A, you get to start from scratch, and your objective is to build a customer experience management program. I believe that's the terminology that you were using.
Yeah.
That's going to provide a positive ROI for your organization.
Yeah.
And you work for a big organization that has a not insignificant amount of disposable resources. Let's say they have 6 figures worth of cash that they could invest in this if they believed that they could provide a positive ROI. Can you outline the steps that you would take if you were that organization and you were trying to get to a spot where you had a positive return, and a rough estimate of like a time frame on when you could start to see that level of return on that investment? And then I want to double back to the same question, but I want you to answer it for small businesses
Yeah.
who really want to drive a good experience for their customers, but they don't have like the disposable resources to invest in these large applications like a Qualtrics or something like that. What should their action plan be to put it together? So let's start with the big business side, and then let's go into the small business side.
Yeah. So I think the first thing you need is you have to identify your champion, right? On the ELT. You have to identify who from the top down is going to be who's going to go to bat for you, who's going to be the person who understands your vision, who's going to be your person in your corner no matter what. And then once you have their buy-in, it's kind of that trickle down effect, right? You're going to get buy-in with your vision from other parts of the organization. I think then too, you need to identify your vision and your goals, what you are and what you're not. And I think it's different across, a customer service organization versus like, a full service like bank like us. You're going to need to map out your data silos, map out, what you have, what you don't have. And then, at that point, for me, I'm a big believer in vendors. I am a big believer in some of these firms out there. My boss has this comment where she says, let the experts do the expert. And I think that's, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm an expert on everything experience management. Customer experience, customer insights is my bread and butter. I'm getting better at dabbling around. I have experience with digital, with user experience and product experience, but like from an employee experience perspective, that's not what I have. But also, if I do have all the power and I am starting from scratch, I am putting all those under one umbrella. So brand is a little different. Brand, there needs to be a dotted line to this idea of experience management, but I think brand also needs to live in your marketing team. I'll tell you for sure, marketing doesn't need to be under retail banking, that's for sure. But that's neither here nor there. But then, everyone who has any type of experience management responsibility would be under one umbrella. So there's not silos in terms of, and I think back to, your Lean Six Sigma, and I know Scrum is similar, because as you think about sprints and being agile, right, in every sprint, what you're trying to do is provide value to the client. And how do you look at if there's value? Well, you look at client feedback, and then you make changes based on that. So you put everyone who has this experience management kind of responsibility on a team, and then you build it out based on that. And so then when you have your data identified, it feeds in, right? It feeds into your experience management software, and then that's your centralized hub of customer record, of customer activity. Now, Salesforce is a really good tool for a CRM perspective, right? And so if I'm an advisor, or if I'm dealing with a customer, so everything feeds into the experience management, then experience management feeds into the CRM. So now, for me who works in the experience management, I can do all my advanced analytics there. But if an advisor needs to know the last 10, 10 conversations for this client to really be personalized, they have that. They have all that information. And then two, as you think about kind of, again, this go back to this idea, this agile methodology, when you have line of business leaders who are strategizing, building out strategy, the person, whether it's the person responsible for that group who is on the experience management team, is involved in those strategy sessions, because they bring that voice of the client to those sessions. And I think at the same time, they bring voice of the client and voice of the employee, right? And so you have more of an alignment. And that's where I'd start with a large firm, because if you have more of that alignment, then you're just going to have a better understanding of how human-centered design is what I call it, right? And so it's this idea of, how do I make business more human? And that's by having that human understanding within your design process. And that's a high level. I mean, there's a lot of intricacies that go into that, and we could probably spend the next 5 hours talking about what the actual minute details are, but that's at a high level. It's top down, bought in, team that is this team that's kind of all encompassing from this experience management idea, and then you're plugged in to the other lines of business in their design process.
I think I think that, like, my experience with most large organizations is that the frontline employees, probably some managers and directors, are hearing customer feedback, or they're taking escalated complaints, or whatever. But generally, when you get into the billions of dollars and how you measure a company size, when you get to the executive team, they're so disconnected from the experience that their clients are actually having that they have no idea. And that's a problem when the people who come up with the ideas and the goals and the decisions and push those down have no idea how that fits within the expectations or how customers feel about their solution right now.
No, well, and that's a good point too, because like I don't know if you've read about the Starbucks CEO, but he goes and works in a store, a few times a month.
I didn't know that. That's cool though. Yeah.
Yeah, not for a long time, but he goes in, and that's this whole idea of this whole like ethnographic research, right? There was an example for, Office Depot. So some of their executive leadership team will just go act as shoppers. And they go, and what they're doing is they're trying to look around and see the behaviors that other shoppers exhibit. But for companies that lack resources, that's why it's so important to let the expert do the expert and have the voice of the customer in those conversations, because then you have the person who is closest to. And I think, and you hit on a good, interesting thing there with the, frontline employees, right? Because that's also a valuable source of information. And if you're not tapping into that, and that kind of goes back to the employee experience, right? If you're not tapping into that, you're missing a humongous resource. And you did say one other thing that I wanted to hit in on from a previous question, but you talked about complaints. That's another thing that those, speech analytics firms that transcribe calls and assign emotion, they have a pretty robust way of entering complaints that takes the manual process out of it. So I think that's a big point too.
No, I think that makes sense. Sorry, I had to go on mute for a second because my dogs, I don't know if you can hear them in the background, but they're going crazy.
You're good. I got mine laying down right there, so I totally get it.
Nothing like a good YouTube video with some dogs barking in the background, right?
Oh, heck yeah, dude.
Hopefully that doesn't turn people off. But so, okay, same question.
Small
businesses. Let's say growing 30 to 50 employee company, maybe 25, doing, a good amount of revenue each year for that size. but definitely doesn't have, $100,000+ to invest in this type of program, could probably invest a little bit of money, but not a drastic amount, but needs to figure out a way where they can start to deliver and measure client experience a lot more effectively. What do you do in that scenario?
I hope you have someone who's really good at taking notes. No. Um, I think that's interesting because I think with a company that size, you have a greater sense of togetherness and you
Yeah.
have a greater sense of everyone is trying to do the right thing, whether it's advancing your business or whether it's just do the right thing for the client. So I think that talks about the paramount importance of really getting that feedback from your employees. And so, one of the things that I would do is kind of, you build a vision that everyone has hands on and that everyone can rally around. That's your vision of we're customer centric, where you are we're doing good work, for the good of our communities. We're advancing that, being able to showcase that. Um, and naturally, everything when you have a company that small, everyone's going to have a little bit of that responsibility, and that's just kind of the natural way that works. And then you'll have someone who probably leads that. You want to have that person in place who's a motivator, but also someone who's very detailed in the sense of being able to identify who does what, that's good, who's good at doing what, and then who's going to bring those certain skills to the table to have an idea of what's the user experience look like. What does the digital experience look, or the product experience look like? What are our employees saying? And there are some firms, like a Qualtrics that does instead of does a less hands-on approach where they give you access to their system and you can get up to response. So when I say responses, I'm talking about survey responses, and I'm talking about any incoming data from a client is considered a response, whether that's like a call, whether that's anything, right? If you have those pieces in place, you can analyze that system on yourself if you learn that system, and you can do that for relatively inexpensive. There are other firms that do that too, and I think that would be having an AI tool is I think paramount. Having an AI tool, you can input Google tags on your website, and you can do free Google Analytics classes and build your own dashboard. That's there
Or
are
we
tools
can
for
build
that.
it for you if you're watching
Yeah,
this. For the
yeah,
record,
yeah.
you can
Or you
hire
can,
us to do
you can
that.
utilize a consultant like Kade. But again, that's where you're going to realize your value, right? You're going to utilize another consultant that is similar to you and has that same hands-on approach, but then it's going to be a part of everyone's responsibility, and that's going to be built into everyone's job descriptions. And I think too, as you think about the designing and defining your infrastructure, you got to start cloud-based. You have to. That's going to be the biggest, having that data infrastructure that's built in, that is not siloed, as a company starting out, you have to do that. And if you don't do that, you're setting yourself up to fail.
Yeah.
Um,
I think one thing that
but
I would say, because we do this with some people, that I would add in is like, I agree with you from like an infrastructure perspective, and I think if you set yourself up with something, one of our favorite tools is Snowflake. It doesn't have to be Snowflake, but you set yourself up with something like a Snowflake, build a
yes,
master data model that will
yep,
tie your systems together in a way
yes,
that will show how you want to measure your client experience, like
yep,
define really how you want to understand your clients, and then build a master data model, map your data into that inside of like a Snowflake or something like that. And the advantage that that is going to give you if you're a smaller company is it'll become very scalable. And so
yep.
you'll be able to scale as you get larger and larger and larger. And at some future point, if you want to bolt on like a Qualtrics or something like that, you already have your data in a structure that will be easily digestible, and you can now integrate Snowflake with
Yep.
Qualtrics, and you can almost immediately start to realize the benefits once you're ready to make an investment into a larger platform like that.
Absolutely. And then those firms like your firm and like Qualtrics will help you prove out the ROI of what you're doing and the value that they bring. And I think, you said something that I think again is integral to the beginning is define
Yeah,
what
you have
client
to.
experience is to your organization.
Yep.
Whether that's the measurements, the client, there's a difference between client experience, customer care, and customer service. Client experience is the ecosystem that your client interacts with from the awareness phase to the repurchase phase to the servicing phase. It's this whole idea of whether I'm looking for a loan, whether I'm looking for an account, when I first see your brand, that's the beginning of the client experience. Customer service is how do I handle issues? How do I service you? Customer care is, how am I making sure that you're taken care of, right? And so that's the defining what client experience means to an organization is one of the biggest things that any organization should do, and it's one of the first things they should do.
That makes a ton of sense, and that's a really good quote. So we've gone for almost an hour. I'm going to give you one final question that I want your take on before we break. Really appreciate your time today.
Gonna get at least 7 wins in the SEC.
At least 7 wins. That wasn't what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you a serious question, but I like that. Final Bedlam in Stillwater this next year. You gonna come down and watch it with me or no?
Man, I should. I should. Is it the week? Is it the week before or after Thanksgiving?
I think it's the week after. I don't know. I'd have to check the schedule. We'll have to figure it out.
I'll have to check. But I don't know if I can go to Stillwater for the last one. And it's not going to be the last one. Maybe the last one while Gundy's
Maybe the last one for like 10 years, like Texas A&M was, and then they'll come back to it. But hopefully when it comes back around, you guys will suck and we'll be good. We'll see.
Hey man, I'll tell you what. Ever since now that I live in Denver, like obviously, I'm still a OU guy, but when they hired Coach Prime, I'm all in.
CU guy? You big Colorado
I'm all in this year on CU.
That's funny. All right. Okay. Final serious question, my man. What does the future of client experience look like? I feel like, ChatGPT gets a lot of press, and I don't want to make this about ChatGPT, but I think it's illustrative of the emerging technology and tools that are about to fundamentally change how a lot of things in business are done. So as these emerging technologies come out, as companies like Qualtrics, like you alluded to earlier in the conversation, are kind of consolidating capabilities from other companies to build kind of themselves into a powerhouse in this space, what's the future of client experience management look like over the next 3 to 5 years?
I mean, I think that's what experience management is, what it is. It's the combination of client experience, employee experience, brand, user, and product. It's this idea of, I think you're going to start to see firms kind of combine their teams, or at least become more cross-functional in terms of who's talking to what, who's doing what, who has responsibility over things. I think you're going to see a lot of AI creating efficiencies. I mean, think about the assembly line was the single probably the single greatest, manufacturing innovation in, the 1900s, right? I think AI is going to act in a similar fashion for companies like us that rely on getting insights out of a lot of unstructured data, a lot of transactional data, and then a lot of demographic data. And I think we're going to be able to spit out insights a lot faster than any human could. Now, with that, I really do believe in this idea of human-centered design. So I think you're going to start to see really, really smart people who sit in seats to kind of interpret that data. Think of the MBA, your MBA, for example, right? The whole idea of the MBA was for engineers to go to business school to be able to learn how to, communicate with business leaders. So the storytellers who are in positions like mine, who are going to be able to kind of paint this story that the AI spits out to leaders. Because I mean, think about it, for the next 5 to 10 years, you're still going to see leaders who are, 50 to 60 years old, and they're going to still have that same kind of thought process that that the boomers have had. And that's just, because they've done well, their firms have done well, and they've done well for a long time. So they're still going to have that thought process. So it's up to us to be able to kind of storytell and bridge that distrust, but also say this is the impact that understanding this and painting that picture is going to provide. And it's again painting the story for the whole organization. And I think as you think about kind of the generations that are now coming into wealth, coming into the workforce, there is a lot more thought around. I want it to be digital first. But I still think there's that idea of I still want to be able to talk to a human when I need to, and as a firm we have to be able to adapt to that or we're going to die. So yeah, I think AI is going to be a huge piece, and the firms that don't do it are going to die.
That's what I was going to ask, because you use the assembly line example from the early 1900s. If
It's just,
you made stuff and you didn't adopt that back then, like you
you
don't
went out of
exist
business.
anymore, right? Like you
Yep.
went out of business. And so like
Yep.
that's my question is like I do feel like a lot of companies are slow with these
Yeah.
technologies
Yeah.
and relatively like in some instances that makes sense,
Hmm.
but it's about to shake up the way we do things in a
It
major way.
is.
And if you don't adopt it and you're too slow, if you're too reactionary and not proactive in how you can start to integrate some of this technology into your processes, you're
Mhm.
going to fall significantly behind your competitors in a way that wasn't really possible over the last 20 years because this
No.
ability to process this information in this manner didn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And it will eventually get commoditized.
Yeah.
And it is. Like, I mean, ChatGPT is the first steps of commoditizing this idea of AI,
Yeah.
right? But for, that I think we're still a little bit away from that. And it's funny too, because during, like, halfway through COVID, the rhetoric was this is going to 100% change the way we do business, and it did to a degree.
Yeah.
But you started to see a rubber band effect too after the restrictions were lifted of in-person transactions. Online sales went down.
Yeah.
So I think that's um, I think that, sorry, there was some hammering. That guy may be here, but I think that's the whole thought of what's going to happen now. I say that, um, but I do still think that there's going to kind of be a sense of like this whole idea of the human interaction, and I still want a person, and I think that's going to be prevalent for a long time. And I think too, as you start to see kind of rising gen, you're going to need to be able to have success digitally, but it's the firms who are going to have a good hybrid approach that I think are really going to be successful. And what this kind of last thing is, I think from a invoking a good client experience to invoking a good emotional client experience is what's going to be important. And I think focusing on the emotional experience is going to be a big key, because if you can, because I mean, what creates loyalty, right? When the first time that you went to an Oklahoma State game, what was the emotion that you felt?
It was great. You're hanging out with your
See,
friends, right? Like we won, like it's all good.
yeah, exactly. And so and then every time since, you're going to create that, it creates that neural
Yeah.
pathway, releases that dopamine, that this is good. I need to do this again. And so that's what we want to try and evoke, is an emotional reaction, because that's going to then build those pathways to say, I want to do that again. I want to do business with them again, and they have my best interest at heart, or, they care about me, they care about my family. And so I think that's where this whole idea of we want to start looking at emotion
Yeah.
is going to be prevalent.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. That's great. I think that's a great point to end on. Andrew, I really appreciate you joining. I appreciate your
Yeah.
knowledge on the topic. I think that was a
Yep.
lot of great information. So thank you very much. I'm going to get this out on YouTube and hopefully people watch it because I think they could learn a lot from your expertise.
Heck yeah. No, it's been as you've been a part of this journey from the beginning, and
Yeah.
and I appreciate everything you've done. And for those that don't know, Kade, when I started working, Kade was one of my mentors. So
Yeah.
taught me a lot of good things, but some things that we don't really talk about. So
Yeah. We're
but
not going to put those on YouTube, but
yeah, absolutely. But it's been challenging from the environment that I started in, going working in the customer experience for the retail bank, being told no in terms of wanting to incorporate a vision and kind of trying to reinvent myself as a product manager, and now coming back and kind of giving the keys to the bus has been a fun experience. And I will say, the experience that I had from going from running client experience for retail to then managing a product has drastically reshaped how I think about client experience. And so in client insight, and then too, the partners that I get to work with and the companies that I get to work with have given me a big piece of where we're going, and also where I think how we need to position ourselves to be successful. But then at the end of the day, man, let's do the right thing for our clients.
Yep.
Let's do the right thing for our clients, for our communities, and let's be a force of good. So I think that's a big driving factor.
No, dude, that's great stuff. I really appreciate that perspective. BOK is lucky to have you in that role. And I hope we get to do this again sometime, man. And we can continue to, maybe we'll get more granular next time. We'll go into the weeds of it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Like I said, we could spend a lot of times kind of
Yeah.
talking about the microeconomic factors. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Mhm.
fun stuff, man. All right.
Mhm.
I appreciate you, man.
Cool.
And
All right.
we shall chat later.
All right, Kate. Good to see you, man. Talk to
Yeah,
you
you
later.
too. Yeah,
All right.
goodbye.